"Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation, so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure.
We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground.
The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember, what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced.
It is rather for us, the living, we here be dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they here gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve these dead shall not have died in vain, that the nation shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
The Gettysburg Address is the foundational American myth. Other countries have religious texts or founding myths or stories they tell themselves about why their country is meaningful and what it's here to do. The Gettysburg Address is that for the United States. It espouses the American ideal of a representative democracy that is of the people, by the people, and for the people. It is, in a way, the United States' secular religion. The story behind the Gettysburg Address is kind of amazing. So it's the middle of the Civil War, and Abe Lincoln is extremely depressed about how the war has been going so far. Lincoln tours the battlefields often, and when he does, he sees thousands dead, thousands more grave markers. It's an unspeakably bleak time, and Lincoln, who is at the time fairly depressed and also very thoughtful and very torn apart by this war, gets up to give this speech in a time when speeches are usually like 2 or 3 hours. The length of the speech is how you know that it's a good speech. So it's very fashionable to give 3-hour speeches. The guy before him speaks for like 2 hours or something. Lincoln gets up, he's the president, he's the marquee speaker, everyone expects this huge speech. Talks for like 2 minutes and 15 seconds. It's like 3 paragraphs. It's the shortest speech in American history, and it is also the best speech in American history. When he's done, there's like some scattered applause. It's rainy. Lincoln doesn't have a great speaking voice. It's kind of reedy and thin. He himself is quite tall, but also very, very ugly. And so he doesn't necessarily cut a commanding figure the way we would think, but something about him is sort of magnetic and sad and solemn. And he guided the country through the war. And in that 2-minute speech, he sums up everything you need to know about the country post-Civil War. He sort of gives the United States its direction, and he gives life to the idea that we were born as a nation of Washington, but we now live in a nation of Lincoln. That is, we're a country compromised by the Civil War, by the terrible question of slavery, and by the attempts to build a more equal society that have taken place and are continuing after the Civil War.
We're going to talk about the presidency today. We're going to introduce the presidency, in fact. Now, to do this, we're going to go through Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, kind of in the same way we went through Article 1 of the US Constitution, talk about some interesting features. But the basic outline of the presidency is not that complicated, and most people know the basic rules. So the president serves for 2 4-year terms if he gets reelected. The president has a veto power. We've talked a bit about this, but this basically just means that if Congress passes a bill that the president disagrees with, he can choose not to sign it, and he can veto that bill, which basically cancels the bill. But Congress can override his veto with a 2/3 vote in both houses of Congress. Now, a 2/3 vote is pretty hard to get, so it's pretty rare that vetoes get overridden, but it can be done. That's a check that Congress has on the president. Executive orders. The president has the ability to give commands to the agencies that he controls directly. These are called executive orders, to carry out rules in some way or to not carry them out in some other way.
I'm an executive order, and I pretty much just happened.
Executive orders, because they're just an order to the president's agencies, they're a lot less permanent than law. But they're also a lot easier to do. You don't have to get anyone to agree with you to do an executive order. You just have to write it down and send it out the door. So executive orders are less permanent and less powerful than actually passing a law, but they still do basically count. And they shouldn't be discounted. They're especially powerful, again, when you're directing agencies to enforce some set of rules or not enforce some other set of rules. The idea of executive orders ties into the president's other big power, which is to pick the cabinet and to head up the agencies. So the president, because he has to faithfully execute the laws, that's kind of his job to execute the laws of the US, he effectively controls the bureaucracy he's at the head of the federal government's bureaucracy. So he picks the leaders of all of the 3-letter agencies that we all know about, the EPA, the IRS, the FBI, all of those. Those are picked by the president. And so that means the president has a great deal of control over how those agencies enforce the laws and rules. So the president has a lot of bureaucratic and administrative control in a way. The president also has this very important power to nominate judges to the federal bench. That means he picks who's on the Supreme Court. Now, the Senate has to confirm by a simple up or down vote whoever he picks to be on the Supreme Court. And so Senate confirmation is required for those people to actually be seated. So the president picks not only the people on the Supreme Court, but also all of the federal judges that serve below the Supreme Court at all of the lower courts, which is literally hundreds to thousands of judges are picked by a president in his 4 to 8 year term in office. And so the president's power to nominate judges means he can shape the judiciary the way he wants to, based on his ideological commitments and the ideological commitments of his party. If he wants to push the judiciary in a more conservative direction, he can do that. If he wants to push it in a more liberal direction, he can do that as well, by picking judges who are themselves more conservative or more liberal in their legal philosophy. Okay, let's pull up this second article. Those are kind of the big hits of the Office of the Presidency. We're going to go through this second article really quickly and see if there's any kind of interesting things. So I'm just starting at section 1, and again, this is the link that's in the syllabus. You can click on this and open it in another window. So right off the bat, you have that the president holds his office for the term of 4 years. And again, this is another attempt to balance giving the president enough power to do what he has to do with concerns that the president might become a king or a tyrant. You don't want a king or a tyrant, and so you're going to try to give him some years in office during which he can get things done, but not all the years in office. You want him to be term limited. You have the description of the Electoral College, which we'll talk about a bit more when we talk about voting in elections. Remember, the Electoral College is a way to sort of like cool the popular passions of the people so that you're not picking a president rashly. Now, historically, it worked out to be basically the opposite, but that's kind of how history goes sometimes. We'll talk more about that later on. See, Section 2, the president shall be commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states. The president's the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. It's a big deal. He cannot declare war. Only Congress can declare war, but he actually commands the troops and tells them where to go. And as we've talked about, that leads to a lot of tension between the president's war powers and the Congress's ability to declare war. He has the power, with the advice and consent of the Senate, to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators concur, and he can nominate ambassadors, judges, and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for. He gets to pick who holds which positions. Section 3, he shall from time to time, it's very specific, give to the Congress information of the State of the Union. This is why the President gives a speech every year called the State of the Union. And recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. So he can recommend things to Congress. He shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and shall commission all the officers of the United States. Section 3. The President has to take care that the laws are executed correctly, that they're carried out the way they were intended. Section 4, the last section, it's a very short article. The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. The impeachment clause. If the President commits high crimes and misdemeanors, and the House indicts him on charges of impeachment, and then the Senate convicts him in a trial overseen by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the President can be removed from office. It has never quite happened. A couple presidents have been impeached, which means the House brings impeachment charges against them, but no one has been removed from office in the impeachment trial. It probably would have happened to Richard Nixon, but Richard Nixon resigned after his members of his own party in the Senate came to him in a private meeting and said, look, Nixon, if this goes to trial, we're going to vote to convict you, and we're in your own party. So either you resign now or you get impeached and removed from office. And Nixon resigned. That's Article 2. So that's the basic setup for the presidency, the stuff 2 4-year terms, veto power, executive orders, picking people for cabinet posts, nominating judges. Next class, we're going to talk about the Federalist Papers and their defense of a strong executive.